Okay, I wasn't sure what to, how to pitch this, and I understand that, a lot of a lot of the other speakers have pulled on some of the projects that have been funded by the ESRC, because that, in a sense, is the nature of the network. But I have got a large ESRC project at the moment looking at health and older people in Brazil and the UK. But I thought it didn't really lend itself very well to the self-sufficient theme. So I'm highlighting that and then moving on to actually talk about maybe some fairly simple comments, I suppose, maybe diagnosis issues, I don't know, about self-sufficiency. And it's clearly, self-sufficiency is one of those issues that every city would like to be self-sufficient. It's like, because otherwise you're just dependent on what? It's like smart. No one wants to be a stupid city. Everyone wants to be a smart city. And so clearly we overlook all the implications of what that means. So if cities are thinking of self-sufficiency, all I'm going to do is really point out, well, what does that actually mean? What are the implications? And in terms of the brief, what are the potential comparative themes that we should think about? And most of my work, apart from the stuff on health, is on an environmental focus. So the idea of self-sufficiency, to me, immediately tends to be about environmental resources. But it's potentially a lot more about that. So just there I've talked about maybe some definitional issues of what we think of self-sufficiency. The first is clearly it's an issue of scale. Often we think of a city as a standalone, but clearly issues of planetary urbanization, clearly the networks of cities and so on. We know that cities don't stand alone. And the more we think about it, if it was trying to be a self-sufficient city, at what level are we actually thinking about? And clearly within the city there's all different types of units that we could think about what do we embody self-sufficiency on. Is it individual households? Is it a block? Is it a neighbourhood? And so on. So it starts to wonder what we're doing and whether it is actually feasible in a very collective sort of thing like a city. Is it viable to have subsets and self-sufficiencies and so on? That maybe prompts some discussions and some debates. And as we know as well, cities are networked, incredibly well networked. So when we talk about self-sufficiency, clearly it's, to me anyway, it's almost contra to networks, because networks actually act as strength themselves, and there's give and take and there's collaboration across networks. So actually when we're talking about self-sufficiency, are we actually turning away from the idea of the network city? So what would be the role of infrastructure, roads, public transport, if we're trying to get this idea of single units of whatever scale to be self-sufficient? We know that cities are just nodes in very complex supply chains. There's networks, social movements, business interests, and so on. So, how does the idea of self-sufficiency talk to the idea of urban, networked urbanism? And clearly cities are very complex metabolisms of all different forms, to which one way we can talk about is flows. And maybe we're thinking here of, are we trying to get self-sufficiency in the flow of energy? Clearly, for climate change, there's a very big movement of that. And what does that imply? Are we talking about self-sufficiency of information, even, about indigenous knowledge and so on, maybe? We think rather than just taking the globalized way of seeing the world. Food, wealth, waste, ideas, toxins, all these maybe have some ideas of self-sufficiency and pose challenges maybe to the whole idea of the city being self-sufficient. And then we come on to the idea of governance and citizenship. And, we know there's vast differences in the way cities are governed throughout the world. And some forms of governance or some forms of citizenship may lend themselves more to the concept of self-sufficiency than others. We know the concept of municipality in some places, like Sweden, cities and municipalities are almost entirely autonomous, while we know in other places they're almost just like a department of a nation state. And clearly that has implications of self-sufficiency and how we know it and the limitations of what that might be. And in terms of citizenship as well, what is important is the sense of freedom, of what people want to be free of what does sufficiency lend itself to that, and belonging, which attaches to scale. So citizens, how do they see belonging? Do they see themselves as a citizen of the city or the neighbourhood, And what units do they belong to and would want to define their self-sufficiency to? So these are, I suppose, just questions that we might want to debate. And clearly, if we're thinking more comparative things, cities we know are very, very complex configurations of all sorts of things. Resources, agency, path dependency. And these will all have fairly big implications for claims for self-sufficiency and the reality of the degree that self-sufficiency can be captured. So if we're starting to, the brief for the workshop was trying to think of what themes could we start to explore comparative self-sufficiency. And often words like this never what they seem on the surface. It's a trope that actually, yes, as an urban leader, why don't we claim self-sufficiency? But actually we need to start a bit more critical questioning. And what are we talking about? Of self-sufficiency of what? Is it just resources? Is it of, the people and their freedoms? So actually, what's the currency of self-sufficiency that we're thinking of? And what's the unit or the focus of self-sufficiency? Are we talking about individuals and citizens? Are we actually wanting companies to have a bit more freedom from regulation and actually sort of talking that about in terms of self-sufficiency? Or are we talking around the city-state itself? So, of whom are we actually focusing on self-sufficiency? And I think when we think about all these urban terms that urban leaders often focus on, resilience, smart cities and so on, we really must question about what audience is this being projected for. And if we think about self-sufficiency, it could be projected to the citizens as a political project. As we've seen many times with all the other words, smart cities and something, often it's actually projected for investors. Is a self-sufficient city or an image as a self-sufficient city a more attractive option for investors? Is it another way of city marketing, setting a city aside from itself? And in particularly, when we dig down, what actually are we thinking is the self-sufficiency as a vehicle for what values? On the one hand, are we thinking of a self-nurturing, bottom-up type self-sufficiency, which one might see as progressive? Or actually, it could be promoting solidarity within an area. But there might actually well be a dark side to self-sufficiency. Because actually self-sufficiency might be just another brand of austerity. Self-sufficiency means you don't need welfare. Self-sufficiency might mean that you don't have, different neighbourhoods don't have solidarity with each other. So there are probably deeper dark sides to self-sufficiency, and that's why clearly we need to start thinking a little bit more critically about it. Is it just yet another way to promote growth, as these things often end up being? So, in terms of critical questions, do we actually mean self-sufficiency, or actually are we trying to get at something else? Is it austerity or solidarity in a different label? And does the term, my limited understanding, does this term self-sufficiency have actually different symbolic meanings in different global regions? Different cultures might actually see the role of the state very differently, the role of the neighbourhood, and so on. So actually, it would be interesting to explore whether there are immediate differences to the term. Who are the drivers, and what are the drivers for self-sufficiency? Why do some cities, I don't think it's that common yet, but there are a few cities that see themselves as, what is driving their claim to it? And that's when we can start asking critical questions. And actually, what are the limitations of the much wider institutional, social and economic, ecological context for claims of self-sufficiency, and whether actually they're fairly false claims in terms of what they're talking about as well. So that's really, it's a series of questions rather than anything else. So, like any concept, we really can't take self-sufficiency just at its face value. Is it another form of what some people have described resilience as another form of immunology? So, if a city and its citizens are more self-sufficient, does it mean they can take more austerity? Ultimately, are they a slightly more immunology of taking more of the bad stuff? What are the implicit values that we're trying to project in terms of self-sufficiency? And actually, if there are cities that really go for this as an urban project, what actually ultimately are the impacts of where it has been applied? Maybe we're too early to have really good examples of that yet, unless any of you do. So those are a few questions. Maybe we can have a bit of a discussion from that after the other speakers.
Thank you.